Let's continue with restrictions to education. In the last video, we discussed language and how most students live in environments and attend schools that focus on spoken language or English. Today we will focus on deaf students who use ASL in the mainstream classroom and what restrictions appear there. Let's start with mainstream programs. Deaf students who attend a mainstream program are in an environment where nobody is like them. They are typically the only deaf student in the school. If they are lucky, there may be another deaf student, but who knows if they are in the same grade or same classes. So what impact does this have on a student's learning? This situation could mean the student struggles with making friends, unable to communicate with them. They may struggle with partner or group work in the classroom for the same reason. However, they may have an interpreter, which poses another issue. So, how are interpreters restrictive? Often people assume when an interpreter is present, the deaf person has equal access to the information. However, this assumes the interpreter is skilled and qualified for the position, which is only sometimes the case for educational interpreters. Many recently graduated interpreters begin in education. People typically see education as an entry-level interpreting job, yet it is not. For example, what if the deaf student is in an advanced placement statistics course? We cannot assume every interpreter would be qualified to interpret the class for a few reasons. 1. Does the interpreter have the knowledge of an AP statistics course? Remember, this would be a high school student and, therefore, only one of several classes they would have to prepare and interpret for. The interpreter may need to study, review, and learn statistical concepts because they lack prior knowledge. 2. Does the interpreter have the skills to create an understandable interpretation? Do they know how to make mathematical concepts visually clear in ASL? Most interpreter programs do not focus on specific situations like interpreting or teaching a statistics course. Interpreting classes is complex. The teacher is knowledgeable and can break down concepts and the lesson. The interpreter lacks the same in-depth knowledge as the teacher. If the interpreter is faced with a concept, terminology, etc., that they do not understand, they will not be able to interpret it clearly for the deaf student. Classrooms are often a two-way street of information. They rarely consist of a teacher communicating one way to a passive audience. Student involvement, class discussions, group work, and independent work where students also chat often happen. If multiple people are talking, the interpreter cannot interpret it all. Even if it is a conversation between 2 or 3 people, interpreters always lag behind the speaker. Therefore, the deaf student is always a few seconds behind in information. Should the teacher ask for a raise of hands, the student may raise their hand as everybody puts their hands back down. Let's compare this to a classroom with no interpreter because the teacher and students can all sign. If every person can sign, every person can be engaged. When a student has a question, the teacher stops, and all students can look at the signer. Alternatively, the teacher resigns the student's question, an action often taken in classrooms where ASL is the language used. Therefore, the interpreter restricts the deaf student's education. Finally, hearing people's misunderstandings of the deaf community create a restrictive environment. Many people are unaware that American Sign Language is not universal and other sign languages exist. This group of people includes teachers and educational leaders. A deaf student whose first language is ASL may inadvertently create misunderstanding between them and the teacher. The teacher may assume the student is uneducated because they are still developing their English skills since ASL and English are different. Thus, they also assume the student can never understand the material. Language is a huge restrictor to deaf students' education. As long as they are not in an environment where they can directly access information through their natural language, they are in a restrictive environment.